So I am super excited about this, and this is going to sound like crazy and abnormal, but it's one of the things I've looked forward to this whole weekend, outside of the warm weather. So as I mentioned, scaling culture is a really difficult thing, and it's different in every type of environment. And the one thing I love up here, outside of Colleen, Noah, and Don just being really amazing senior leaders and executives, is the fact that they represent a diverse set of organizations. The whole quote I said around people learning culture from someone that started 2 weeks ago, I got that from Don at Slack,
it really
who we all know. And so here's what we're going to do. So we're going to do a panel for 25 minutes, and then we're going to take some questions before we go into breakouts. And we're going to go into breakout sessions around themes. So each one of the panelists are going to be leading a breakout session. So bottoms-up engagement is one. Who owns culture? There are a lot of stakeholders, and it's complicated. That's another. And then leadership buy-in is a third. And so yeah, I imagine we'll have a lot of questions and a lot of good content there. So I wanted to just start quickly by having the panelists do just a 30-second intro of yourself, where you've been, so people have context for who you guys are.
Hi, everyone. My name is Noah Love, and I lead community and engagement at Jet.com and Walmart US e-commerce. So I started at Jet when we were just about 100 people, and 18 months later, we were acquired by Walmart. So that was an interesting experience, which we'll get into. But my team focuses on building an amazing internal community, and often that intersects with the external community as well, too. But we focus on things like diversity and inclusion, health and wellness, internal events, and excited to hear about all of your experiences in your own companies with scaling culture as well.
Hi, everybody. Hi, thank you. My name is Dawn Sharifan. I've been doing this HR people thing for over 15 years now, which is weird because I'm still 22. But most recently, I'm at Slack. I joined when we were about 200 people. We're over 1,000. That happened in 2.5 years. So there's a period of time where we doubled in size every 6 months. I've worked for this. Slack is my fourth startup, but I also worked for a 100,000 person organization. So I've seen all the spectrums of it. And I'm really excited about kind of the work that we're able to do in HR people now versus 15 years ago when I entered the profession.
And I'm Colleen McCreary, and I feel like I took the same drug that you did, because I've been doing this for over 20 years. And I'm currently at Credit Karma. Actually, this conference knew that I was joining Credit Karma before everyone else did, because they asked me to do it at the same time I was deciding to go to Credit Karma. So we had to keep it a little secret for a couple weeks. But so I'm the head of people there. Prior to that, I was at a company called Vivo, which is the music video space. And then I also was the head of people at a company called Zynga. I started at 100 people. We grew to 4,000 in 3 years and IPO'd and went through lots of ups and downs through that process. And then I've also spent a number of years as a consultant to startups from 5 people to 5,000 people. So this obviously is a topic near and dear to my heart.
Awesome. So one of the things that we associate culture with is engagement. And Gallup shows that 7 in 10 employees are not engaged. And the one thing we're also struggling with is turnover. But when we make the business case to the companies, first of all, we don't all speak the same languages across the C-suite, and that can be difficult. But I wanted to kick it off to you, Noah. When we think about business case and ROI, Jet is doing some really interesting work in mapping employee journey. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you guys are doing and how you're measuring this?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about the employee experience journey, we start at the recruitment process, and we go all the way out into what is soon to be an alumni program. And so when we look at things like our onboarding program, our engagement programs, our associate resource groups, and everything sort of in between someone's first day and their last day with us, we had some really great buy-in early on from our CEO, who gave us a lot of autonomy to say, build the most killer culture that you can possibly do. Here are the resources, here's the investment, and go. And so for us, it was, okay, what do we prioritize? What do we look at? So we spent a lot of time prioritizing the onboarding program, our 90-day new hire experience. We spent some time prioritizing employee groups and clubs and resource groups. And over time, we have, especially after the Walmart acquisition, been asked the question of, okay, well, what's the ROI? What's the real purpose for having all these fun, flashy things along? You talk about the employee journey, but what's the real return on investment here? And we can quote lots of research out there that shows, you got to have an effective onboarding program. Otherwise, you're going to lose your employees in 18 months if they don't have a great first 90 days. And you can sort of quote all that data. But what we're looking at now, which we've talked about earlier today, is how do we actually get these employees tied back into the business with the things that we're doing. And one example of that is with our employee resource groups, which are charged to do lots of things, including impact the business. So for example, our women's resource group just did a site takeover and showcased women entrepreneurs on Jet.com. And that was something that we thought, this is going to be something that's going to sort of drive this group's success and also be the differentiator for when we go back to the table and say, this is the ROI to the business, this is what we're talking about.
Got it. One of the things, building on what you said, Noah, that Don, you mentioned, when you think about a company that's doubled in size every 6 months, that's actually terrifying. And daunting. And I know, Colleen, you went through something similar. But one thing you highlighted as something that was critical to you was investing and onboarding. Can you talk a little bit more in detail about what that looked like and how you set that up?
Sure. So, I think we all, let's try to get engaged here. How many people have some sort of responsibility or oversight or interest in onboarding for your company? Yeah. And I think we can probably all agree that it's important. How many of you are from the Bay Area, work in the Bay Area? Okay, most of you. So you know that the average tenure in the Silicon Valley world is about 18 months. Outside of that is 24 months. But in the Bay Area, you're looking 18 to 24 months. So why do we think that it's okay to take 6 months to ramp up someone to do their work if they're just going to leave 12 months later? And so for us, and I will say, when you're growing and doubling in size every 6 months, Colleen, maybe you feel the same, you're just trying to keep the train on the tracks and put your pants on in the morning and just get to work. And so, we had a lot of versions of that as we moved along. One of the things that's been a pillar and consistent is our CEO meets with every single group of new hires. And that's how we kind of start from the beginning in terms of how we make sure that the values do not get distorted or a game of telephone. I'm very lucky that is at his insistence. I don't have to beg him for that. As we've gotten bigger and he's been busier, that's moved from weekly to maybe bi-weekly or monthly, but every single new hire meets with him. We've also then looked at people that are maybe have been here, longer than 2 weeks to come in and talk about what does this mean? How do you use Slack? How many of you guys use Slack? Yeah. How many of you are oh my God, Slack? I've heard many comments. Well, some of it is even if you feel that way, how do you use Slack at Slack? So we do not use any internal email at all. And for a lot of people, that is a really steep learning curve, and that's a cultural piece for us as well. So we spend a lot of time on onboarding, just how do you use the tools? So I think it's really identifying the culture values piece, the tools that you need to do to work, and then also who are they going to be as they enter into your organization so they can have that great 90 days. So maybe, if we're lucky, they stay longer than 18 months.
And Colleen, going a little bit even earlier, we've talked about this too, hiring. When you think about the culture and the vision that's set by the leadership team, how do you hire for the culture that the company has?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I feel like people set their hiring criteria at the very beginning, and then they think that just is set in stone forever, and they never think oh, maybe we should think about changing that. And so my big belief is you have to really invest in the onboarding of your interviewers. And so some of this is that I came out of recruiting early in my career, so it's a lot easier for me to speak to the challenges of recruiting. And I think it's also a very Bay Area focus, the war for talent, so to speak. So people sort of naturally gravitate to recruiting being a priority. And And sometimes, as we've seen even in the public eye, like recruiting is HR, and that's all HR is, and that's all that they do. And so there's an education process around that. But I like to, and even it's great right now because I'm only a couple of months into my new role with Credit Karma, who's about 800-ish people, and able to sort of, I immediately went into the recruiting world to say, like, how are we interviewing people? What are we looking at? Why is that important? Who's involved with this? Do we feel like people are making the right decisions? Or, we talk a lot about our values. Are we using our values? What are the questions we ask? And I always think it's so interesting because people are like, oh yeah, I have this list of questions. And I was like, the list of questions doesn't matter. It's the interpretation of the answer that matters. But everywhere you go, you'll hear like, oh yeah, we've got these great questions and we've got structured interviewing. We know what questions to ask. And I'll say, have we talked at all about how we're interpreting the answers? What does that mean? How we're talking about those answers? And so I always roll out the interviewer training that is also hey, here is how you evaluate the interviewer that you're observing. And so really starting to coach our interviewers further. But then also setting sort of the expectations that we're going to continually be looking at this, that this is not a set in stone forever. I mean, it's easy when someone comes in who's new, like I am, to be like, oh, what do we have under the hood here? And feeling like I have the support from the leadership that's saying, we know this needs to change, so please, have an opinion, give an opinion about that. But I also feel like it's setting that tone that you need to continually be looking at this and not be afraid to push back on some leaders who want to hire people who don't necessarily reflect the culture that you're stating. And I think that's a really big one to do. I actually look for the opportunity to do that early on when I'm working with new teams, to be able to highlight, okay, we all say that we're this, the interview feedback that I'm hearing says this, that doesn't match. And, like at one point I was able to say, I had an interview where we were interviewing for this VP level role. And I like to take senior people outside of the office when I interview them intentionally because it takes them out of interview zone, like takes them out of the, I'm getting dressed today for my interview, which is great, except for when you have a senior leader, you want to see who they really are. And I always share that in one case, we were literally like just walking around the block and I like tripped in the middle of the street and this guy did not even notice. He just kind of like kept on going. And I was like, so we're going to wrap this up pretty quickly because clearly the idea of paying any attention to anybody else but yourself is, sort of not important. But then being able to have that conversation with the leaders who are so excited about this person. Oh, they're going to be amazing. They've come from all these great companies. They're going to do all these things and say like, this person is going to be Hannibal Lecter inside of your house. Like, we don't invite Hannibal Lecter to our dinner table here. So, but this is all about setting tone, setting expectations, and setting timelines to be redoing, looking at these processes as you're scaling.
That's awesome. I love that example. One of the complicated things about culture when you've been acquired or have acquired a company or have merged with a company is that everyone has their own set of cultures. And then now the new parent company has made a decision to either let everyone be themselves or they've tried to force them into this one culture. Raise of hands, who here is at a company that's like a family of companies been acquired or have other companies that are part of it? Yeah. So Noah, Walmart.
Let's talk about Walmart.
Yes. So Walmart has this family of e-commerce companies. They acquired Jet, they have Bonobos, they have ModCloth, they have all these companies. And you guys still call yourselves Jet, but you kind of say you work for Walmart.com. What's the dealio there? Yeah,
so when Jet was acquired by Walmart in 2016, I was and I'll admit it, I was the first person to say, I'm not working for Walmart. I grew up in New England, I live in New York, this is not a company I identify with, this is not a company that I would ever shop at. My parents were protesting at Walmarts at one point when they were coming into our town, so no. And kept an open mind, and here I am. And Walmart is taking an approach to e-commerce through acquisitions, right? You've probably heard in the news we acquired Bonobos and ModCloth and a few others after Jet. And so one of the things when Jet was acquired that happened, which kind of piqued my interest and said, how's this going to work out, is, the CEO of Walmart came in and said, we want you guys to just keep doing what you're doing. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, when are we going to have to start doing the Walmart cheer? And for those who have worked at Walmart e-commerce, you have the Walmart cheer, and so when are things actually going to start to change? And one of the things that over time I was pleasantly surprised with is we got to keep our happy hours. We got to, Walmart doesn't swear, and we could still say shit in the office. On all of these things. Sort of stuck around, right? And what was the secret sauce at Jet did not leave. And so the skeptic in me was like, okay, all right. So we started to acquire these other brands, and Bonobos goes camping once a year. They all go into the woods and have a great time, and that stuck around too. And ModCloth had things that were really important to them around giving and getting out into the street and giving back to women's causes, and that stuck around too. And so you've got all these brands now that are operating as digitally native, many of them digitally native, vertically integrated brands with their own cultures. But the challenge is now that we've got these awesome cultures that are coexisting, how do you get them to meet at the top at the mothership, right? And think of themselves as a family of brands too, in addition to their own what's important and special about their own culture. And so we've taken the approach of creating an associate value proposition or an employee value proposition. Associate is also a Walmart word, where what's really, really unique and authentic to Jet, to Bonobos, to ModCloth is great. But here are a couple of things that we've spent months and months and months collecting that are really important to just about every single person, whether you work at ModCloth, whether you work at Bonobos or Walmart.com. And so things like innovation and inclusion are things, with a manifesto and a value proposition that we can go out there as an employer brand and really say, this is what we represent. And if you come and work with us, you get to be a category manager that works on Jet and on ModCloth and a few others. And at the same time, you may be working out of the ModCloth office. You get to experience this really, really cool subculture, but you still have some identification and can really sort of align at the top and say, yeah, but I also work for this really cool family of brands, and that's kind of our secret sauce.
Can I just add to that, just as both having been the acquirer company and then also being acquired? Noah and I just met today, but I was laughing because I said, oh yeah, I worked at a small startup called Climate Corp. It was acquired by Monsanto. I can understand that Walmart feeling. We had the same sort of issue. And
was there a cheer?
No, that's not a cheer kind of place. You learned a lot about where your food comes from, though. But the important thing that you just said about the, letting employees know what they're signing up for, what's that value proposition, and being very honest with people about what direction you're going. So if you have been acquired or you're doing the acquiring, I always say, this is when you're in that dating process through the acquisition or even after, the amount of transparency you can have about the experience, there's no right or wrong answer, but making sure that people know what they're signing up for, what they're getting. I feel like a lot of companies don't really talk about hey, your email is going to change to this other company, or what you were doing before doesn't necessarily work here. And then even having that conversation, making sure at the executive level, to be clear, I was telling Noah how I had to take all of the leaders from Monsanto on tours of Google and Facebook, and lots of companies out here in the Bay Area, because they're headquartered in St. Louis, which is a very different place. And their compensation is completely different, how they think about employee growth and career growth, going back to the 18-month conversation. And eventually the point that I had to get to with the management team at Monsanto was to say, hey, I think we need to create a new country. It's called San Franadel for our San Francisco and Seattle employees. And you need to think about compensating and rewarding these people just like you would in Brazil and China. And when you think of other countries that geographically this part of the world is different. Now, this is all in the sort of pre-Trump election days as well, so maybe people are more understanding of like that people are different throughout the United States, and we should maybe think about treating them different. But that's a big point, like that honest reflection and conversation with people about what they're signing up for, and then also what are the systems and tools you're building that actually are true to that or are not true to that.
Absolutely.
Sorry, that was funny. Like the whole people are different, and yes, we realize that more now than ever. But Don, one of the topics yesterday was around remote and distributed teams. And not that Slack is completely distributed, but you guys have a number of offices. And one point you made about scaling culture is like, how do you take what was so special at 50 or 100 employees and bring that up to what's 1,000 people? And I know one of the tactics that you guys use, multiple tactics, one is, making sure everyone comes to HQ. Can you talk about that and some of the other tactics you use to make sure you're scaling the special aspects of culture?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 9 offices in 6 countries. We just turned 4 years old, so I like to say we like to do things as complicated and as quickly as possible. We talked about onboarding, orientation. We bring everybody, regardless of where they're hired in the world, to San Francisco for 1 or 2 weeks, depending on your role. Every 6 months, I think it's my financial responsibility to ask the question, is this still working for us? Should we continue to do this? It's expensive to do. It's a tax on those people to be away from their families for 2 weeks. And not everybody loves to do that, right? And we find the value to be so strong that we do. We will continue to do that. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One, I mentioned people get a chance to meet Stuart, our CEO. That's really powerful. That's the number one piece of feedback we get from all of our onboarding data is the chance to meet and talk with him. The second piece is they get a chance to really meet the people that they're going to be slacking with or DMing with later. And that trust building, that knowing who you are, that assuming that good intent, those relationship builds pays dividends down the road. Other things that we do tactically are we have this software called Perch. It's just like an iPad. We have it above our water cooler in each one of our offices, many in a couple of the bigger offices. And you could be getting a cup of water, and you might run into somebody from another in the Dublin office, for example, and you might just have a little bit of a conversation with them. Because you do hear a lot like, hey, those conversations happen in the hallways in San Francisco. I miss out on those conversations. So even just seeing, oh, that's what their cafe looks like, or hey, just waving to that person is one way that we do that. The other thing that we do that I think is really important is we want to make sure that we're not exporting American or San Francisco culture to every single other office. So there's values that we have that I think are universal, but then also making sure that we give space and time for each office to have their unique culture as well. So when we open a new office, we send a landing team so that they can bring some of those values and cultures there, but then as we bring people on, they kind of evolve it to what is appropriate and right for them locally.
That's awesome. So we're going to soon wrap up on the panel side so you guys can ask a few questions, and then I'll give each of the panelists an opportunity to say what they're going to talk about in their breakout. But one of the things I also wanted to touch on, Colleen, we've talked about breaking down silos in organizations, which becomes an impediment to relationship building across, different departments. And our software company actually is almost like a LinkedIn and a Meetup for companies that actually facilitates that relationship building by, events and volunteer activities and things of that nature. But, when you're scaling, and I will love, and you guys can chime in on this, when you're scaling an organization and those silos get thicker and thicker, or you're just old and established, not that you're really old.
You personally, Noah.
Very old, very old.
And those silos are thicker and thicker. What are some of the tactics you're using to break down those silos?
Well, first of all, I think it starts at the top, obviously, and how the leadership team acts. What do they value? How do they have conversations? How they talk about each other? I always say, I prefer to work on a management team that's a basketball team, not a swim team. It's a really good metaphor for sort of how we want to interact, and then, since it starts at the top and then it sort of scales down, like people will model whatever behavior that they see at the top. And I also feel like if you get to the point with your management team that I think basketball is a really great example. In the Bay Area right now, I talk about the Warriors, who actually do a really nice job. If you ever watch the Warriors, they're really good about giving feedback in the moment. So you can see them on the court, like, hey, you missed that. Hey, you did that. You can actually see the players do that. And I like to use those sort of real world examples so people can say, hey, whatever we're doing, someone's watching and they're going to sort of emulate from there. So I think that, sort of that's the first point. I think the second point is that you have to be intentional early on and throughout the company's organization of actually setting up projects that have cross-team collaboration. And establishing owners that are not necessarily just the leader who's in charge. So you have to, I feel like you have to, sort of seed a project like, and, sort of cultural things obviously always get the most attention in that way. But intentionally saying like, hey, we want to look at whether or not we should be doing performance review. So let's get a team of people who are from these different groups who are sort of together. By the way, I don't believe in any of that, and we can have a conversation offline sometime, but let's make sure that we have people from these different groups who may not normally be invited to the conversation as well. And as many times as you can do that around your products or your line of business, the more often you'll find that people actually realize the value of having somebody's outside perspective on the business front, which then obviously will also be important through the cultural front.
Okay, so we're gonna roll into breakout sessions, and everyone's gonna get a workbook. We have a workbook for you guys, and the panelists have listed out a series of questions that you guys will answer and go through in the workbook, and they'll help you talk through a framework of how to think about things, and this is your opportunity to ask them kind of whatever they want, whatever you want. So the first one is gonna be bottoms-up engagement, engaging employees from their first day. That's gonna be Noah. Who owns culture? Again, there are multiple stakeholders in this, and it doesn't just fall on one person, it doesn't just fall on HR. That's gonna be Don. And then leadership buy-in. So if you don't have the optimal buy-in from your leadership and you need more buy-in just either from sponsorship or budget level, that's gonna be Colleen. But I did wanna take a pause and just see if anyone had any pressing questions at the group level that you guys wanted to ask.
Culture committee. Are either of you going to cover that?
Mine's better.
Well, I think if you have to say it, Noah, I don't know.
That's fair.
I think for me, spoiler alert, who owns culture? It's not HR. If you come to my group, that's what we're going to be talking about. We're talking about how to make sure that you don't get pigeonholed. Well, we're going to talk about whatever y'all want to talk about, but that's my point of view and that kind of thing. If a culture committee comes up, happy to have that conversation, but that's kind of where I'm thinking about leading the conversation.
And we're going to focus a lot on the first 90 days and working with new talent to sort of embed an ownership culture early on.
I've heard a lot of talk about, companies and what they're doing. How much do you include the cleaning staff, the people who come in and clean the building in all these processes and in creating culture?
So for us, our cleaning staff, our porter service, they are actually employed with a different agency, but we include them in any of our social events. We give them moments of giving. We bring in companies for giving and food and all of that. They're included in all of that. They are technically not our employees. They're employed through a third party.
We have a pretty robust workplace team too that includes the cleaning staff, the folks that are keeping the building running, and they sit in the same area as the people that are working on the strategy of how do we create an innovative workplace that creates collision points where people are coming together in meaningful ways, and trying to balance the hybrid workspace and satellite seating and hoteling with people that are coming and visiting, and so they are a really well ingrained part of our company, and they sit with all of us too.
In addition to silos, how do you guys think about old versus new, whether that's years of difference or like 2 weeks versus of difference, and just trying to go through like cultural transformation as well as imbuing existing culture into people?
That's a big thing that we're focusing on right now at Credit Karma. So Credit Karma is 11 years old, and up until 2 years ago, they were maybe 200 people, and now we're 800 people. And so we have a massive sort of old versus new. One of the biggest things that I've been focused on is most of the things are not written down. Right? So this is the biggest issue, which is like there's no process for anything. There is a process though, it's just nobody, unless you've been there, you know it. And so I've been talking a lot about, hey, how do we get these things documented so when people are onboarding, I was explaining to Noah, one of the big issues we're fighting is that one of our values is helpfulness, which is great. And so usually to get anything done, you have to have a helper who's been there for a long time, who knows how to do it. But then the helpers don't get any recognition for helping because the person who got the thing done that you helped with actually gets all the recognition. So that's sort of one of the things we've been able to note. And then one of the other things is I came in and sort of was like, I felt like there are a lot of rules for things, and rules are not really my cup of tea. Guidelines tend to be my cup of tea. And so I scared the crap out of the compliance and security teams when I stood up on stage and said, I want to get rid of all the rules that we have here. So I was, and then I realized, not really being respectful to, the reason. And so, we've been talking a lot about, okay, what things have happened in our past that have created what we have now? Are those the things we need for our future? Instead of having a whole set of questions that are not so much old versus new, but like, okay, what happened in the past? Is that still, apparent now? And then really, what do we need for the future, and how do we have those conversations, and who's involved in those conversations?
I just want to add one thing really quickly and maybe be a little bit controversial. I think if people are getting too stuck on old versus new, Slack's been 3 different companies in the 4 years that we've been together. It is okay to grieve the loss of what the company was, and it is okay to not want to be at that company anymore. And I will thank you and honor you for your time that you have been here, and please leave.
Yeah, I just did that at our all hands about 2 weeks ago, where I said, really thankful for what everybody has built. But there are some of you who may no longer, sort of be excited to come to work every day in the environment that we are now, and naming that and acknowledging that and getting leaders comfortable with that. And I say it's very much like all of your friends just graduated from high school and went off to college, and you're still in the same town. You need to make new friends. If this is the work that you want to be doing, this is the place you want to be doing it, like, okay, let's help you have that conversation. But you're dead on. Like, I feel like you have to call it out, name it, and open the doors to let people leave and feel good about it.
Yeah, and don't misunderstand, I'm not kicking anybody out, but everyone has their own ownership and can make decisions for themselves.
Hi. No, I was going to say, I'll add one more thing that, we're in a company where we have people that have been around for 30 years and folks that have been around for 30 days. And so I think one of the things that we try to check ourselves on a lot is trying not to create ethnocentric decisions from either one side or the other, where you've got a bunch of, really sort of new folks in here dictating how the 30-year veterans should be working and thinking and acting, in the same way and the other way around is, there is a new guard in, and so how do we avoid making decisions that are all based on, well, 25 years ago, Mr. Sam would have done it this way. So that's top of mind for us.
And we'll take just one more question before we break out, because I want to make sure you guys get some good quality time with the speakers.
All right, mine's a doozy, but thank you for sharing. Really enlightening conversation. And wow, what a topic. Quick comments. Where's the empathy for inclusion and diversity? The experience and where people have come from and what they've created for the next generation have a lot to offer. Right? So there's some, but I agree, it's what's the pathway that we allow people to make choices, right? Yeah, okay. Because I actually work in an industry where we don't have a choice to get on stage and say that, because the people that are, quote unquote, the elders, actually are the smartest subject matter experts for machines that run like the banking system. And to teach the new generation of folks coming in, it's not easy, right? So it's deep domain knowledge, and it's not an application that you can ramp up new people on. So it's a very interesting dynamic to think about, which brings me to the question. I'm in the transformation business. So companies that are struggling to reinvent themselves and they're 40, 50 years around, and they come from a culture of bottom line, P&L, and yeah, we've got the values, and it's a great poster on the wall. And this whole concept of the experience of the employee and the journey, right, is challenging. How do you sell that to leadership? And I've got some ideas, but even before going there, the leaders need to transform. Do you have time for that? How do we build the time to get people to do the inside work at these executive levels to go, oh my gosh, there is something that I have to change and start investing in? Which is a lot of what we've talked about: empathy, compassion, authenticity, all of the above the line leadership development that has to happen. And I mean, it's a hard question, but those are the questions that solve the problems, right? So I don't know.
I actually don't think it's any different. My own experience, and some of this is framed from, especially the Climate Corp to Monsanto transition, which was very relevant to that. I don't usually say it doesn't matter if you've been an executive for 50 years or you've been an executive for 50 minutes, because I know a number of sort of very San Francisco stereotypical hoodied founder CEOs who are very set in their ways. They know everything, just as much as the 50-year-long year vet. I generally believe that most of those leaders and organizations have to go through some pain before they will recognize that there are issues that are connected to them and their behavior. And what too many times what happens is the other executives are allowing and tolerating and covering for that behavior. And I literally just had this conversation with a COO on Friday of a pretty good-sized startup here in the Valley, and he's covering for their CEO. The whole management team is covering for the CEO's sort of micromanaging behavior and saving the company. And I was like, you have to let him fail. Like, he has no incentive to change because he doesn't feel any of the pain. He doesn't see the repercussions that are happening across all of your teams. He does not see his behavior as being a problem. And that may mean that your organization stumbles financially. It may mean your product doesn't get out on time. That might be the only thing that will create the change. That's the only thing I've ever seen is when people have seen the personal impact on the thing that they care about the most, which is either the company or their own egos, or sort of their pay.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Which one of you guys wants to go outside for your workshop?
I'll go outside.
Okay, cool. So here's how we're going to break up. I'm going to come around and make sure everyone has a workshop pamphlet. But we're going to do 3 leadership buy-in outside around where that thing is, the tan thing. Yes. I haven't had enough caffeine today. And 2, who owns culture? Don, so you'll be sectioned right here. And Noah on bottoms-up engagement, you'll be sectioned over here. And so at the end of this, we'll have one person do a 60-second report back on the most interesting things that came about the session, what shocked you, and some of the things that you guys are going to do in your jobs moving forward. All right.